If you're interested in what I look like in real life and want to learn more about me, then follow my Instagram page at Joe the Insomniak. This is a story my mum told to me from when I was only 2 years old. My family had a small acreage of farms in Canadian pastures. It is not too far out from our city, but far enough that it's very rare to have unexpected visitors. At the time, we had some sheep and chickens, but it wasn't a huge farm. It was just my mum, my dad, my sister and I. My sister was 5 years older than me, so only 7 at the time. We also had a sweet dog named Maggie. My parents has always said that she's the best farm dog we ever had. She was special, very sweet with other animals and kids. She never barked or got upset without a good reason, much unlike our last puppy who would bark at the wind. My dad was out of town this particular night, probably visiting my grandparents in his town down south. My mum was alone with just us little guys, and Maggie was sleeping soundly in the porch. So my mum woke up in the middle of the night to Maggie growling. My mum's a pretty light sleeper, so it doesn't take much to wake her up, but this was very unusual behaviour for a puppy. My mum thought it was probably an animal, so she took a peek outside. Sometimes coyotes or large bucks would upset Maggie, so that was the most likely explanation. However, it wasn't the case on this night. Our farm is right adjacent to the highway, and there's a long, unlit lane that leads into our yard. It wasn't obvious at first, but my mum saw a dark vehicle slowly creeping down the lane. The car's headlights were shut off, and we didn't have a lot of light in the yard. My mum's stomach immediately sunk. Anyone with good intentions wouldn't shut off their headlights. She also had 2 little kids in the house that she had to protect. She watched them slowly creep into the yard. I don't know how many there were, but at least a couple of guys got out of the vehicles, then heading towards a shop where my dad keeps his tools, tractor, etc. Now at the time, there was a big power panel on the side that controlled all the electricity to the yard lights in the house. They opened it up and started to go through it, evidently trying to figure out how to shut off the power. God knows what their intentions were. Luckily, my family has a hunting rifle, and my mum grew up on farms, so she knew how to use one. Now she quietly pops open the door, just enough to stick the barrel out and fire a warning shot in their direction. They freaked out and hopped back into their vehicle, reversing all the way down the lane so that she couldn't see their license plate. I honestly have no idea what these guys' intentions were. Maybe simply rob us, but the idea of multiple people pulling into the yard with no lights on, shutting off the power, is terrifying. Either way, I'm extremely grateful for our sweet Maggie and my mum for keeping us safe. It's been 21 years since that happened. I pray I never see them again. When I was younger, I used to live on a house that was surrounded by farmland. It meant we had very few neighbours and very little to do. Now, I was scared of the dark. This phobia didn't fade away until I became an adult. The thing I hated most about living here was being bored, and if I had to walk home at night, because there were no street lamps obviously, only the moonlight if you were lucky. There's one incident that my mum later told me about that terrifies me to this day. More the fact that this happened and I was completely oblivious to it. Apparently when I was 7 years old, I was asleep in my room one day when it was snowing outside. Now there was mysteriously footprints leading into and around our house, but there never seemed to be anybody else there to make them. What's more strange is how that they seemingly vanished after a point, like someone had literally floated away. My dad was always skeptical of this and thought it was someone playing a prank on us. Now apparently, I would always complain about seeing a strange person at my window and talking to them, which at first my mum and dad shook off as me being paranoid and my imagination playing tricks on me as I was scared of the dark. Well, apparently I went on about this for months until eventually my dad decided to sleep in my room with me, and lo and behold, I woke him up saying that man's there again. My dad said don't worry and to go back to sleep. He then rolled over, and to his horror, he saw a man peering in at me watching me sleep. He got up immediately, grabbed his rifle, called my mum to go and get some help, and rushed outside, but unfortunately the man was gone. Now this is in the day before you really had camera systems in your home. What we did do is buy a really big guard dog that stayed in the front of the house, and after that, he never returned. Stranger danger was something my mum was hyper vigilant about telling us of. She had always warned us about the horse farm down the road from us, and the weird people that lived there. Well, it is about a mile away, and I usually was only that far from home if I was on my bike with a group, so I wasn't really concerned. One day, I was walking in my neighbourhood when some neighbours I didn't know well began speaking to me. While we knew most of our immediate neighbours, this couple lived on a street perpendicular to ours, and I only interacted with them at Halloween. If that. I was probably 7 or 8, and they told me they were giving a trampoline away. And boy, had I always wanted a trampoline. Begging my parents to get one for years. I was over the moon. I told them I'd have to ask my parents, so surprisingly though, they told me I could have it. It was in the backyard waiting for me, but not to come back with my parents. I thought this was a little strange, and I didn't listen to them about not getting my parents. I wanted a trampoline. Now my dad is a totally oblivious person, so apparently when I told him this, it didn't raise a red flag. He came along with me to ask about the trampoline. We knock on their door and wait on their footsteps, but no one comes. I was annoyed. I really wanted one. Now years later, reflecting on the event, I realised that there's a small fenced field, and that's where they'd ride the horses sometimes. I once even pet the horse and admired the owner as she rode. I didn't think of it as a farm aside from the one horse and fenced in area. It seemed to be a normal yard to me, so my mother's warnings are in vain. I shudder thinking about what would have happened if I'd gone to the home alone. Thankfully I had more sense. Though at the time I didn't realise how close I was to danger. Just how close I was to having a trampoline. My dad ended up looking in through the windows and he could actually see them hiding, waiting for me. We never went around that area again and reported it to the police. Growing up, I lived in a farmer's house. My dad and most of my family were all farmers, so growing up around nature was a normal thing to me. Now we had a problem with crows and other animals trying to eat all of our crops, so we put up multiple scarecrows around the house where we lived. Now, I was always paranoid of them as a child. I used to tell my mum stories about how they would move. Of course, she just thought it was my imagination running wild and never thought anything of it. That was until one day she saw one move too. After constantly complaining, my mum and dad eventually switched rooms with me and would let me sleep in their room. My mum said it was one moonlit night where she was laying in bed unable to sleep. She got up and decided to go and make a drink in the kitchen. As she's looking out the window, she was sure that she saw something move. Confused by this and a little groggy, she decided to go back to bed and try and get some sleep. When she got back to her bedroom, she was sure it's just her mind playing tricks on her, so she gone back to sleep. However, she heard constant sounds outside and knew something was up. She then goes back to the kitchen to get a better look, and what she sees terrifies her. Because of the moonlight, she can see the reflection off of two pieces of glass. After closer inspection, she can tell that these are a pair of binoculars. My mum let out a blood-curdling scream at this point. That's what I remember, and my dad telling me to stay in my room and not move. He quickly grabs his hunting rifle and fires a warning shot into the sky. What's more crazy is that whoever was watching us with the binoculars didn't even move. By the time my dad had gotten his dog and went outside, whoever this was long gone. What he did find is truly harrowing. Upon closer inspection of where my mum saw this figure, she could see some old tattered clothes that appeared to be almost identical to what our scarecrows were wearing. This sick person decided to imitate a scarecrow in order to spy on us. We very quickly after moved houses, and I only learnt about this story in my adult life in order not to scare me. And to be honest, I'm thankful that they never told me at the time, because that would have truly terrified me. I'm originally from a state where it's predominantly hot all year. I'm not a big fan of warm weather, so when winter comes I have my windows open and spend as much time as possible outside. Temperatures average around the 50s, but that's besides my point. We live close to lots of fields and have lots of open space around us. It was one of those chilly winter nights. I was about 10 years old, and the only people home were two nannies and me. They were at the other side of the home watching TV, while I was in my room. It's getting late, likely around 10 PM, so I decide to take a shower, hopping into bed. Everything's fine. I hop out to the shower, getting ready for bed. At this point I should quickly go over the layout of my room. It's rectangular and has two windows facing the front door entrance to my home. From my windows you can see a walkway to the front door, and the path is sort of gated in brick. Basically, you have to enter the driveway, then turn left and walk down a path that leads to my front door. My bed faces one of those windows, and all I can see all the way down is a path. Both windows have a mesh screen. This is where things get scary. Like I mentioned earlier, I had the window facing my bed open to let the cool air in. My room was well lit, so it's hard to see anything through the window. However, as soon as I turned off the light, I see the figure of a man with his face pressed up against the screen. In that moment, I felt his piercing gaze, his motionless, smiling. He had facial hair that looked as though his whole face was covered in fur, and the hair on his head was the same length. I briefly thought I'd imagined this and was seeing something that wasn't actually there. Now, I'd taken a couple of quick steps back towards the window to get a closer look to confirm what I saw was real. It was. This all happened in a matter of seconds. I bolted out of the room towards my room where my nannies are. The hallway in the house is very narrow and long, and there's large windows facing the entrance. I didn't dare look out. I reached my room where my nannies are in and tell them what happened, and they just laughed at me. To be quite honest, it was a boy who cried wolf situation. I always played pranks on them, so it was hard for me to be taken seriously. I had to beg them to come check with me, from which I can remember they took seriously. When we get to my room, there's no one there. My window screen is left untouched and the man is gone. I don't think they were totally convinced, and neither were my parents. I couldn't sleep in my room for days because of the incident and nothing was done about it. My house didn't even have an alarm system, so there was nothing stopping them coming back. I'm still very disappointed how the situation was handled. I had no power at all. I have no idea how long the guy was out there for watching me, and if he showed up again after. I remember how messed up his smile was, how menacing it was. I'm glad that I was not harmed by this man and that it was only a visit. I at least hope. I stopped opening my windows at night, and I now get paranoid when I feel the cold air at night time. I've been in 2 bad car accidents. I know the rush of adrenaline going through your head when you're in a crash. For that reason, I pull over at any crash I see to help out, unless emergency services are already there. I have a level head, basic medical training, and usually a first aid kit on me. Normally, everything is fine, and I leave once EMS/police show up. Today, that totally changed. I came around a bend and saw a pickup that had hit a tree. A body was slumped over in the seat. I immediately pulled my bike into subdivision right across the street and ran over. Quickly grabbing my bag, taking off my jacket and helmet, I see a white man in his late 20s with a slim frame slumped over in the seat. Confused. I'm not sure what his situation is. I can see that there's saliva dropping down the side of his face. My brain instantly went to seizure. The car who's been a little behind me also pulled over. The driver's calling 911 right next to me. He tapped on the window a bit, and there was no response. I jumped into the bed to see if the back window was. None of them were there. I hopped out and went to see if anything has changed. The driver's no longer convulsing, but he was still non-responsive. I knocked on the window to see if he had come out of it. The driver jumped up and began panicking. This is pretty common for someone who's had a seizure, especially if they've had a traumatic experience on top of it. He began yelling and lightly punching the window. This happened for a span of around a second, which meant I jumped 20 feet in the air. Once my brain cleared for a second, I loudly say, "Are you alright?" if he could unlock the door. Luckily for me, he didn't understand a word I said. He slumped back over, which prompts me to knock again. He then jumps back up and promptly begins freaking out once again. After a quick moment, he calms down again and sat there smiling. It wasn't a normal smile. It was sort of haunting. His tongue was hanging out, very yellowed. The man who pulled over with me, Mark, came around, which brought another round of freaking out. This began the pattern of any new stimuli causing him to freak out. A third person pulled over and came to check in. He quickly came to the same conclusion: drugs. Our driver was now in a relaxed state until the sirens started. Me and a third person began directing traffic while Mark kept an eye on the driver, relaying everything to 911. I had to move my jacket, helmet and bag over near my bike, just in case he started driving again. About a minute after we heard the first sirens, the fire truck, ambulance and sheriff pulled up. The fire truck blocked traffic from one end, and after briefly talking to the cop, Mark went to start turning cars around from the other direction. A cop pulled up from the end blocked by the fire truck. The two cops, after determining that the driver was combative, drew their tasers. A firefighter used a pick to break open the driver's side window. After the first hit, the driver began to claw at the back window. Once it had been pulled out, the cops began yelling at him to open the door. Par for the course. The driver doesn't get a word. They decide to smash the front window. After the first hit, they didn't have to do much, as the driver began hitting back. He punched the window out entirely. The cops yelled some more. The driver's still yelling and punching. The first cop tased him. If we didn't hear the crackling, we wouldn't have known he was tased. He's still punching. Second cop tases him. Still nothing. First cop again. Second cop. And the first cop tased again. And the second cop opens the door. The driver begins kicking and punching while getting dragged out of the car. The cops attempt to hold him down. The largest of the firefighters jumps on him, and now there's 6 cars flying up the road towards us. They all ran over to assist. Now, eventually me and Mark had to stick around to be interviewed by the highway officer. This experience really made me scared of people and drugs, as I wasn't already. It really turns them into some kind of monster out of a film, almost unstoppable. This happened only a couple of months ago, so I'm still quite on the edge. I had a group of friends that lived about an hour and a half away from me, and I'd frequently go hang out with them. The drive never bothered me, but this particular night I dreaded it. I first noticed a car about 20 minutes into my trip home. It was about 2 AM, so not many cars are on the road. Now this guy was practically hitting my bumper the whole way, which is strange because there's no other cars there. I quickly wrote it off and turned on my music. The time on the freeway is about an hour, and he was behind me the entirety of it. When I saw he was getting off the same exit, I began getting nervous. I told myself I was just being paranoid. I was heading home as I normally would, until I noticed this car making every turn behind me. I start turning down random roads testing my theory, and he's trailing me the whole time. I stop going towards my home and start driving random, trying to think of what to do. I tried whipping down roads at this last second, but it didn't work. I was driving through red lights and stop signs because I was so scared of what might happen if I stopped. By this point I was desperate. I decided to call the police, telling them that I'd been followed for over an hour. I gave them a description of the car and my location. The dispatcher told me to drive to the police station, and there's going to be officers waiting in the parking lot. As soon as I turned to the parking lot, the driver sped off. One of the police cruisers immediately flips their lights on and followed them. I give my statement but never hear anything back. This happened just a few days ago, while I was walking home from work. I should explain, I live in a small, rural community. It's a very safe, rather quiet town. I walk to and from work every day. I carry both a box cutter and pepper spray at all times. I feel rather comfortable walking at night and actually find it calming. It was about 10:15 on this particular night when my journey began. I had a very uneasy feeling that I couldn't place. I decided to call my boyfriend. I knew he couldn't do much since he's at least 3 hours away, but at least he could call the police if something happened. We talked and laughed as long as I walked. Everything was fine. That was, until I passed the Goodwill parking lot, which is a halfway point. I looked over and saw a man sitting in his truck staring at me. I didn't think much of it. People can be odd, and perhaps he was simply dozing. As I passed the parking lot, I heard the truck start up behind me and felt a little uneasy. We just kept walking, thinking I'm being paranoid. I should also note that there's a young man walking 300 feet in front of me. He kept stopping in the middle of the sidewalk. Because of this, I walked slower than I would normally. I didn't want to catch up with him. Eventually he crossed the street and I began to pick up the pace. As I was about to reach the entrance to my neighbourhood, the truck from before flew around the corner, stopping 500 feet in front of me. He turned his truck so it's blocking the road. I'm now freaking out. I tell my boyfriend what's happening. He says don't worry, everything will be okay. I continue walking and watch as this man got out of his truck, standing in front of it, staring directly at me. I put my head down, tightly grasping my box cutter. I got closer and closer to the man, my breathing getting heavier and heavier. I could tell he was at least 6 feet tall, and the streetlight shone down on him. I can see his arms bulge. I'm only 5 foot. Now I'm pretty small too. Suddenly though, a car came from down the street, maneuvering around the truck. About 30 seconds later, a car followed suit, then a third. When the fourth car passed, I saw the man smack his fist in frustration. He clumsily climbs back inside, took a sharp U-turn before tearing out of the neighbourhood. If those cars had not come by, I honestly don't know what would have happened to me. Let me start by saying that I really enjoy driving, and I'll often be on the road for hours just listening to music, getting lost. So more often than not, I sleep in my car on the side of a country road. I don't like it when I'm the passenger though. I always go alone. Usually, I sleep for a bit, wake up, then go home without incident. There's been a couple of times when a deer has startled me, or even a person knocking on my window to make sure I was okay. Always met with a scream. But what happened last night absolutely takes the cake. I took my dogs up to a really nice walk that I've read about online. I was about an hour drive, and I'd planned to drive for an hour at a time, explore a bit, then keep going so the dogs didn't get restless or bored. I'd always taken plenty of food and water, and was planning to be gone before about a day, which I was going to a park in a popular parking spot that Caravanners like to go overnight. It was lovely. I had myself and my dog. We had a really good time. We arrived at a sleeping destination and found that there wasn't any place that we could actually park. The bays weren't laid out, so you had to use common sense to find a spot, so you're not blocking anyone in. The parking area was free and could only contain about 10 caravans without being too tight. I was a little annoyed, but hey, we're in a very rural area here, so it kind of makes sense. I let the dogs out to do their business and went to sleep, thinking nothing of it. To describe where I parked, it was opposite a little cottage, but not directly in front of it. There's plenty of trees there, and I don't feel nervous or anything. I know I'm not intruding on the owners in any way. I feel safe. For some reason though, I was having trouble nodding off. Usually I sleep like a baby in my car, but it's very spacious and comfortable. As silly as it may sound, to some I genuinely thought I had nothing to worry about. That was until a long, high-pitched screaming sound woke me up and the dogs at around 11 PM. The dogs go nuts, as they usually do at the drop of a hat. I was still in a confused daze when I see a very tall man dragging what I think is a key around the perimeter of my car. He goes very slowly, not taking his eyes off me the entire time. He has a very malicious grin on his face all the while he's doing so. Horrified, I crank up my chair and start the car, ready to floor it, but he had made his way to the front of my bonnet, blocking me from reversing. This is when I thought that he was holding a butcher's knife. He held it up and waved it at me. I scream and lay on the horn. My dogs had leapt over the back seat and were practically frothing at the mouth, but it didn't faze him. This lasted about 10 to 15 seconds, not long. He then slowly walked away across the road into the cottage. I drove home without stopping. I'm never doing that again. Thanks for ruining it for me, terrifying guy. Thanks for ruining the paintwork. And thank God for cars being able to be locked. This happened my senior high school year. I was driving home alone from a movie with my friend on a Saturday night. After about the first 5 minutes, it became the same route I drove to school every day, so I was kind of on autopilot. I never text and drive and rarely speed, and definitely was not speeding because I have my junior license. I was pulling up to a light that had just turned green in enough time that I did not have to slow down. I went through the light. Then I just remembered the most force I've ever felt in my life. I opened my eyes when I heard a man banging on my window, yelling in, asking if I could get out or needed help breaking the window. I was able to get my seatbelt off. I managed to unlock it. I then went to look for my phone and the man said, "Forget the phone. I've already called the police. Please sit down on that hill far away. It's smoking and I want to make sure there's no fire." So I sit where he tells me after he says, "Am I okay?" My hand had glass in it as well as my face. Nothing life-threatening though, so I just sat there until the ambulance arrives. Right as I get on the hill, I heard the man who was yelling saying, "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" and just took off in full sprint down the road. I was so confused. Why was this man who was just helping me chasing this poor 50-ish-year-old woman down the road? I realised it was a woman who hit me because she was nowhere to be seen initially after he got her out of the car. She was trying to flee the scene. The man successfully got her and brought her back to the scene. The cops arrive and go back to her immediately and breathalyze her. He then gives his statement. All while this was happening, there's this boy outside of his house who come and brought me a bag of M&Ms and says, "Wow, you spun so much. Does it hurt?" I had no idea my car had spun. All of a sudden, I hear lots of swearing, saying, "You think this is on me? No, you hit me." The poor boy is standing next to me. I told him to go back to his mum. I'm thankful he did. Definitely not the same for an 8-year-old. The woman screaming and swearing. She then tried to come towards me and one of the officers, but gets held back. At this point, they said she blew a .23 and they put her into handcuffs. I had yet to give a statement to the cops and I thought, what am I supposed to say? Then I realised in the midst of all this, I forget to even call my parents. My mum was across the country for work, so I called my dad. My dad was at a concert 3 hours away, so he called my neighbour. My neighbour, who's one of our best family friends, calls me and says, "I'll be there in 10 minutes. Don't say anything to the cops until you tell me the story first." I then tell him that I'm nervous because I was the one to T-bone her. He said, "Just tell me what happened." And I said, "I went through 100% green light and the lady went through the red hitting me and she blew a .23. He lost it. He went over and said, "You almost just killed an 18-year-old because you got behind a wheel after drinking. How stupid are you to be doing this?" And she said, "Well, I wish I'd actually killed her," and started swearing again. She went on to scream the entire time we're there. Just, saying I was awful and that she wished she'd killed me. Finally, the cops take her away. My car was completely done. It was a Volvo, and the cops said they've seen this car do really well in different accidents and it probably helped save me. I thought I was going to have to see her in court, but she didn't even show up. I hope to never see her again. I wish I got the name or number of the man who helped me. He just disappeared after giving his statement. A real hero. I really don't know what would have happened if he wasn't there and I was left with that crazy lady. When I was younger, me and my friends used to play in a forest near the back of one of my friend's house. It was kind of like swampland. To be honest, it was pretty dangerous and we should never have been playing there in the first place, but we're kids and didn't really care. And I remember one day we were playing hide and seek. 4 of my friends had run off to various locations. I was finding them. Now little did they know, I'd always climb up the tree stealthily and see every single one of them. But now it was my turn to hide, and hide I did. I went further than I've ever went before, walking for probably a couple of miles. I only realised later how far I'd gone. As I was hiding, I heard one of my friends laughing, saying, "You can come out now. We're going to play a different game." I stayed quiet, smiling, thinking, they ain't seeing me here. I was under a board. It's very hard to see me. Then I heard someone shout saying, "We need to play something different now." My stomach drops as I realise this isn't my friends. This is the voice of a much older person, probably in their 50s or 60s. I keep hearing "come out now" and see a man with a stick. He looks to be in his 60s or 70s, clearly homeless, and he has a chain in his other hand. Now the 4 minutes I was waiting for him there were probably the biggest 4 minutes of my life, and probably saved me from something terrible happening. After I saw the coast was clear, I got up and sprinted back where I come from. I call up from other friends but they can't hear me. I can now hear this maniacal laughter coming from where I ran from. He's closing on me. I quickly take an alternative route that's very hard to get through if you're big. Luckily where I was young I was small and I can get through the small vines and stuff. I eventually make it back, and I'm so scared I don't even tell my friends what's happened when I see them. I just say I need to go home, and I never went to play over there again. What terrifies me is knowing that I was miles away from anyone, covered by tree lines. That guy could have done God knows what to me in there, or kidnapped me, and I'd be absolutely helpless. I've never posted anything before, but this happened when I was around 15 years old in high school. I had a boyfriend at the time who lived a fairly short walk from the school, and we'd often walk over to his place after school to hang out for a bit before I went home. Because we took the same routes often, I knew all the houses and landmarks on the way. In January, my boyfriend and I started to notice a car that had been parked near the wood line in the same spot for a while. We didn't think anything of it for the meantime, thinking maybe the car's died and they can't afford to repair it. But as spring came and the snow melts, the car was still there, parked in the same spot at the end of my boyfriend's street. We passed it almost every day as we walked there after school. And as the days got warmer, a rotten stench come from the car. I joked to my boyfriend saying, "I bet there's a body in there," and we laugh it off. But we're curious now, so one day we peer inside the car windows as we passed. The car was messy, but not filled with trash or food, and a discarded backpack lay across the seat. Papers were strewn there. It looked like an ordinary car, except we knew it hadn't moved for months and the smell was indescribable. The smell continues to get worse as spring turned to summer. One day, when I couldn't come over for some reason, my boyfriend and his dad decide to investigate the car. They found that the doors are unlocked and the keys are inside. Pretty strange. They went around the back and popped open the trunk. My boyfriend told me that a swarm of black flies come up. The smell was coming from the trunk. Inside is a bunch of black garbage bags. They then called the police. The cops told us that inside of those bags were rotten pieces of meat. The first pieces were tested and belonged to a pig. But a few weeks later, my boyfriend's dad got another call. It turns out there was actually a dead body under the pig meat. This took place a couple of years ago when I was still dating my ex. Him and his dad had adopted a Rottweiler/German Shepherd mix from the shelter. The dog was really aggressive towards strangers and other animals. It took a couple of months for him to warm up to me, but eventually we bonded, and I would occasionally be cuddled up on the couch with him taking a nap. It got to the point where he would push people aside so he could lay with me. During the summer, my ex and me were house sitting for his dad who's on vacation with his girlfriend. My ex would usually be home to walk the dog, but this time he was at work and I had to walk the dog. We had ordered a special harness beforehand, hoping it would make him pull on his leash less. My ex and his dad didn't live in the safest of neighbourhoods, and it was getting dark out while I was getting into the woods to go on our walk. I let the dog run around by himself, but kept his harness on. Since he was very aggressive towards other people and other dogs, I'd like to keep it on so I could call him to me as soon as I saw someone else and get him on the leash again. For this reason, I was also kind of on edge and looking around me the whole time. We weren't walking for too long when I saw a group of guys coming in front of me. They have hoods on, keeping their heads low, while clearly whispering to each other and nodding their heads towards me. I very quickly glance behind me, and I then see another group of guys coming from that side. I quickly realised it was dark out, and I was only 16, walking by myself in the woods. Now the dog had actually run off and couldn't really be seen in the dark. I quickly called him, and to my side, he appears. He pushed himself against my leg and starts growling at the guys. I told them just keep walking, or I'll get him to attack. Luckily the guys quickly went in the opposite direction and started jogging away. I'm so grateful to have had a dog that was actually obedient and hadn't run off. I know for a fact that something terrible would have happened if it weren't for that dog or that day. I'm 31 now, but was a teen when I was walking home on a sunny day through the woods. It was in winter, but had a nice cool breeze. I remembered holding a Tupperware in my hands that was still hot, containing pasta and broccoli my grandma had just made me. It was so cool living 1 block away from my grandma, because a quick 10-minute walk meant I got some really good leftovers. In between my house and her house was a patch of woods, but thorns and ticks prevented me from taking a shortcut through. I remembered looking down the sidewalk just as I reached the middle of the patch of woods to my right. I then hear someone say, "Hey, where you going?" I looked up and to my left, towards the road. I then see a thin man in a white van with his windows rolled down smiling at me. He was driving in the opposite direction to me. I simply said home, continuing to walk. He shouted, "Hey!" So I look back and see him hanging out of the window. "I'll give you a ride home, come here." I keep walking and say no loudly. I stopped and turned around when I heard him drive away. I began walking again, creeped out now, wishing that the woods didn't run so long next to the sidewalk. I remembered wishing I was home already. I was super alert now, hearing every critter in the brush to my right, as well as rustling leaves and things scurrying about. I pick up the pace, reminding myself that the woods are packed with lizards. I said to myself aloud, "It's just the silly lizards, don't worry." But I then hear a vehicle coming up behind me. Out of fear, I look back, and to my horror, it's the same white van with the same man smiling at me. The van slows down next to me, and a big angry guy flung the door open and jumped out. I turned to my right and began running as fast as I can into the woods. I was jumping over bushes and log vines, clenching my grandma's Tupperware for life. I looked back once, and the thick brush of the woods was slowing down the big guy. I've never been chased like this, and it's horrifying. It's very primitive when stuff like this happens. I knew just for going straight I'd reach my backyard by a chain link fence. I remember the thorns sticking in, but I can't feel the pain because of the adrenaline. I instead run. Once I reach the fence, I chuck the Tupperware and hoisting myself over with my ripped jeans and faceplant on the ground with a loud thud, I ran to the porch and started begging and banging on the back door to be let in. My dad sees me panicking, covered in dirt and carts trying to open the back door. I felt safe to be back home with my dad and our Rottweilers. He sat me down and starts questioning me and calls the police. The cops arrived, only two, and took a report. They said nothing looked like it happened in the area before. One even said that I was lying. I remember they left and my dad swore he believed me. I couldn't sleep in his room that night though if I wanted. I remember feeling really sad and frustrated about not being believed and going to bed without even eating the pasta and broccoli. That would annoy me too. It was hard to sleep or go anywhere for months after. After that I was scared that the man was still out there and that there were more coming for me. My dad ended up getting me a cell phone and installing an alarm system to make me feel safe. I still have major trust issues because of it to this day. Me and my brother used to love playing in the woods, kind of close to our school. We had to go under a couple of fences to get to it. We would always have a great time. However, one evening in particular, this almost ended horribly. We're playing like normal when my brother suddenly gasps and stops. I hear a loud sound and something falls from a tree. He quickly jumps back and says we need to get out of here. I go up to him and I can see a 9-inch nail sticking through a piece of wood. I don't know how he done it, but my brother's tripped a booby trap into activating. Had he have been 1 second faster, it would have killed him instantly.